Horror games aren't just about jump scares. They're about the moments that stick with you long after you've turned off the console. From haunted towns to derelict spaceships, these games redefine fear and shape the genre forever. Today, we're counting down the 20 best horror games of all time. Let's see if your favorite nightmare made the list.
Number 20, Fatal Frame 2: Crimson Butterfly. When we talk about horror, most games rely on guns, explosives, or some over-the-top weapon to make you feel safe. Fatal Frame 2: Crimson Butterfly flips that idea on its head. Your only line of defense is a camera, the camera obscura, that can exorcise spirits if you snap them at just the right time. The closer and scarier the shot, the more damage it does. That means to win, you actually have to let these terrifying apparitions get right up in your face. Set in a cursed Japanese village, the story follows twin sisters Mio and Mayu, whose bond becomes the emotional core of the game. Inspired by Japanese folklore and ghost stories, it trades cheap jump scares for oppressive atmosphere, creaking floorboards, eerie chants, and spirits that flicker in and out of view. The game's deliberate pacing makes every corridor feel like a death march. Fans often call it the scariest entry in the series, and even today on forums like r/horror gaming, players describe moments where they physically couldn't move their character forward because of the tension. Crimson Butterfly didn't just make ghosts frightening, it made players question their own courage, one photo at a time.
Number 19, Outlast 2013. If Fatal Frame is about facing your fears, Outlast is about being completely powerless in the face of them. Set in the remote Mount Massive Asylum, you play as investigative journalist Miles Upshur, who quickly discovers that the asylum is overrun by deranged patients and the result of horrific experiments. There are no weapons, no combat, just a camcorder with a night vision function. Managing your limited batteries becomes its own kind of survival mechanic. Every flicker of green night vision grain adds to the dread. Hide under beds, slip into lockers, crouch in the dark, but if you're caught, it's over. That feeling of being hunted turns exploration into pure terror. What's fascinating is how Outlast became a viral phenomenon. Red Barrels had almost no marketing budget, yet YouTubers, especially PewDiePie, made it explode. Screaming streamers turned it into a household name, creating what critics call the PewDieBait era of horror games, titles designed to be as fun to watch as they were to play. It's still remembered today for its brutal opening chase sequences and its grotesque characters like Chris Walker and the Wall Rider. And while some argue it leaned too heavily on shock value, Outlast left a permanent mark by proving that powerlessness can be just as compelling as empowerment in horror design.
Number 18, Soma. Developed by Frictional Games, the team behind Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Soma dared to combine traditional survival horror mechanics with deeply unsettling philosophical themes. The setting, Pathos 2, a crumbling underwater research facility, already drips with atmosphere. Flooded corridors, flickering lights, and inhuman creatures stalking the halls set the stage. But the true horror doesn't come from the monsters, it comes from the questions the game asks you. At its core, Soma is about identity, consciousness, and what it means to be human. If your mind can be copied into another body, are you still the same person? Are you the original or just a duplicate with someone else's memories? These questions aren't hypothetical in the game. You're forced to make decisions that hinge on them, and the answers can leave you shaken long after you stop playing. Gameplay-wise, it strips down combat in favor of stealth, much like Amnesia, but adds environmental puzzles and narrative-driven exploration. Critics praised its writing and world-building, and players on Reddit often describe it as the horror game that made me cry. It didn't have the viral streaming explosion of Outlast, but Soma carved a unique niche, horror that scares your body and your mind at the same time. It's the rare game where the existential dread lingers long after the jump scares fade away.
Number 17, Phasmophobia. When Phasmophobia arrived in early access in September 2020, it instantly tapped into a perfect storm. The rise of Twitch streaming, the growth of VR, and a global audience stuck at home during the pandemic.
Developed by a tiny studio, Kinetic Games, it became one of the most talked about horror games practically overnight. At its core, Phasmophobia is a cooperative ghost hunting simulator. Up to 4 players enter a haunted location armed with ghost hunting gear, EMF readers, spirit boxes, cameras, thermometers, and crucifixes. The goal isn't to kill the ghost, but to identify what type it is, from classic phantoms to more obscure entities like jinns and yokai. The catch? Every investigation is different. The game uses procedural systems so no 2 hunts feel alike, making every flicker of a light or whisper over the spirit box unpredictable. One of its biggest innovations is how it uses voice recognition. The ghost can hear you through your microphone. Call out its name too many times, and it might slam doors, cut the power, or start a hunt. That mechanic blurred the line between player and character, making every conversation risky. Its success also came from its social design. Unlike most horror games where fear is solitary, Phasmophobia turned terror into a party. Watching friends panic, argue, and accidentally get each other killed became as fun as the scares themselves. That balance of genuine fear and chaotic humor kept players and streamers coming back. As of 2025, it still averages nearly 20,000 players daily on Steam, with updates adding new maps, ghosts, and mechanics. It proved that horror doesn't have to be cinematic to work. Sometimes the scariest experiences are the ones you improvise with friends in the dark.
Number 16. Dead by Daylight. When Dead by Daylight launched in 2016, asymmetrical horror was still a risky genre. Most attempts at one versus many multiplayer fizzled out quickly, but Behavior Interactive found the magic formula: make the survivors weak, make the killer terrifying, and build everything around tension. A typical match features 4 survivors repairing generators to escape, while one player takes on the role of the killer. Survivors can't fight back. They can only evade, hide, and outsmart. The killer, meanwhile, has powers and perks tailored to their identity. That asymmetry ensures every game is filled with unpredictable chases, last-second escapes, and brutal sacrifices. But what really propelled Dead by Daylight into horror history is its licensed content. Over the years, it became the ultimate horror crossover event. Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, Ghostface, Nemesis, and even Pyramid Head. No other game lets you pit Laurie Strode against a Resident Evil tyrant in a multiplayer match. It became a living museum of horror icons. The game also thrived because Behavior treated it like a live service, constantly adding killers, survivors, maps, and balance updates. The community meta evolves constantly, with streamers and pro players influencing strategies. And despite being nearly a decade old, it still holds a massive player base, over 60,000 concurrent players on Steam alone. Critics sometimes argue it isn't scary in the traditional sense, but its impact is undeniable. Dead by Daylight turned multiplayer into a sustainable horror format and built a community that treats every match like a new slasher movie.
Number 15. Visage. Few cancellations hurt gamers as much as Konami pulling the plug on Silent Hills and deleting PT from the PlayStation Store. For years, fans craved a true successor to that terrifying hallway demo. In 2020, indie studio Sad Square delivered exactly that with Visage. The game takes place inside a suburban home, but nothing in that house is ever stable. Hallways stretch into infinity, doors close behind you, and reality itself seems to warp with every step. The design philosophy mirrors PT. Mundane domestic spaces become sites of pure terror. Instead of gory monsters, Visage uses atmospheric dread and psychological tension. What sets it apart is its pacing. Hours can go by with nothing but flickering lights, faint footsteps, or whispers, just enough to build unbearable tension. Then, when you least expect it, the house lashes out, a ghost in the mirror, or a figure at the end of the hall, or a door slamming shut. That unpredictability makes the scares land harder than any scripted jump scare ever could. Critics praised it as one of the most effective psychological horror games of the decade. Community discussions on Reddit often call it the real Silent Hills we never got. Streamers flocked to it as well, since the slow build led to explosive on-camera reactions. While it didn't have the marketing muscle of AAA franchises, Visage carved a reputation as a cult masterpiece. It showed that the DNA of PT could live on and, in some ways, even surpass the original by expanding its scope into a full-length nightmare.
Number 14. Alien Isolation. When Sega announced a new Alien game in 2014, fans were nervous. After the disaster of Alien's Colonial Marines, expectations couldn't have been lower. But Alien Isolation didn't just redeem the franchise, it set a new gold standard for survival horror. Instead of mowing down hordes of xenomorphs, you're trapped aboard the Sevastopol space station, stalked by a single, unstoppable alien. The creature isn't scripted, it's controlled by a complex AI director. That means it hunts dynamically, sometimes backing off, sometimes waiting around corners, sometimes crawling into vents right above you. No two encounters are the same, which keeps you constantly on edge. You play as Amanda Ripley, daughter of Ellen Ripley, searching for answers about her mother's fate. The narrative ties directly into the film series, but the gameplay is pure survival horror. Limited resources, crafting tools like noisemakers and flamethrowers, and a motion tracker that's just as stressful as it is helpful. Critics initially praised its authenticity. The 1979 retro-futuristic design of the ship is flawless, with CRT monitors and clunky tech. Over time, the game's reputation has only grown, and today it's considered not only the best Alien game ever made, but one of the best horror games, period. Players still say few moments compare to hiding in a locker as the xenomorph breathes just inches away, knowing one wrong move will end it.
Number 13. Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2002, Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem might not have sold millions, but it's remembered as one of the most innovative horror games ever made. Where most games try to scare you with monsters, Eternal Darkness scared you by breaking the fourth wall. Its most famous mechanic is the sanity meter. As your character witnesses horrors, their sanity drains, and the game starts to play tricks on you, the player. Fake TV volume sliders, blue screens of death, even pretending to delete your save files. These illusions blurred the line between reality and the game. For many, this was their first taste of a horror game that reached beyond the screen. The story spans centuries, following multiple protagonists across different eras as they battle cosmic horrors inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. It was ambitious, weaving together a narrative that tied ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, and modern times into a single mythos. Though it was a commercial failure, critics adored it, and it's often cited as one of the most underrated horror titles of all time. Fans still beg Nintendo for a remake or sequel, but its unique sanity effects remain unmatched even decades later. In many ways, Eternal Darkness was ahead of its time, showing that true horror isn't about enemies on screen, but about making players question their own senses.
Number 12. Layers of Fear. By 2016, the horror genre was split. AAA franchises leaned heavily on action, while indie studios leaned into experimental psychological horror. Layers of Fear, developed by Bloober Team, became one of the standout indies of that decade. You play as a troubled painter wandering through his Victorian mansion as it twists and changes around him. The game doesn't have combat. Instead, it relies on environmental storytelling and reality-bending design. Hallways rearrange themselves behind you, paintings melt into grotesque forms, and doors lead you in circles. The mansion itself becomes a character, constantly rewriting its own rules. Thematically, the game explores obsession, madness, and artistic perfection at the cost of humanity. It blurs the line between genius and insanity, making players question whether the horrors they see are supernatural or just the painter's unraveling mind. Critics gave it strong marks for atmosphere and art design, though some noted it was more of a walking simulator than a traditional game. But for many players, that was the point. Layers of Fear wasn't about fighting monsters. It was about being trapped inside a collapsing psyche.
Bloober Team would go on to work on The Medium and, most recently, the Silent Hill 2 remake, but Layers of Fear is still remembered as the title that put them on the map. For players craving psychological dread instead of action, it was one of the purest horror experiences of the decade.
Number 11. Until Dawn. Imagine if you could control every cliché slasher movie you've ever seen, from the dumb teenager who investigates the noise outside to the couple that decides to split up. That's Until Dawn. Released in 2015 as a PlayStation 4 exclusive, Until Dawn is an interactive drama where your choices directly shape who lives and who dies. It's basically a playable horror film, complete with Hollywood talent like Rami Malek, Mr. Robot in Bohemian Rhapsody, and Hayden Panettiere, Heroes. The performances, captured through advanced motion capture, gave the game a cinematic quality that was groundbreaking at the time. Gameplay revolves around exploration, quick-time events, and branching dialogue. The famous butterfly effect system means even small decisions, whether you choose to hide or run, pick up a certain clue, or comfort a friend, can ripple out into major consequences. By the end, you could have everyone survive, or nobody. The game blends multiple horror influences, creepy cabin-in-the-woods atmosphere, slasher tropes, and even Native American folklore with its Wendigo twist. Critics praise its ability to keep players on edge through tension and decision-making rather than combat. It's also become a cult favorite for group play. Friends gather on the couch, debate choices, and scream when their favorite character dies. To this day, Until Dawn is considered one of the best party horror games, and it paved the way for studios like Supermassive to build the Dark Pictures anthology and The Quarry. For many, it remains the definitive interactive horror experience.
Before we dive into the top half of the list, I want to know, what's the scariest game you've ever played? Was it one of these classics or something totally unexpected that still haunts you today? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading through and featuring the best ones in a future video. And hey, if you're enjoying this trip through gaming nightmares, hit that like button. It really helps more horror fans find the channel. Number 10. Fatal Frame: Maiden of Black Water. The Fatal Frame series has always stood out for its uniquely Japanese approach to horror, blending folklore, rituals, and spirits with the terrifying camera obscura mechanic. Maiden of Black Water, originally released on Wii U in 2014 and later re-released on modern platforms in 2021, is a continuation of that legacy. Set on the haunted Mount Hekami, a place associated with ghostly apparitions and ritual suicides, you play as multiple protagonists investigating the supernatural phenomena surrounding the mountain. Just like in Crimson Butterfly, the only weapon you have is your camera. But here, the Wii U gamepad originally made the act of aiming and framing shots feel more immersive, almost like you were holding the camera obscura yourself. Thematically, the game draws heavily from Japanese mythology, particularly the idea of water as a boundary between life and death. The mountain is soaked in rain, rivers, and pools, each carrying with it a sense of unease. Even the ghosts are waterlogged, dripping with symbolic weight. While it didn't receive the same universal acclaim as earlier entries, it's still remembered for some of the most unsettling spirit encounters in the franchise. The 2021 re-release introduced it to a wider audience, cementing it as a modern cult classic. Fans often highlight how Maiden of Black Water preserved that slow, suffocating dread that makes Fatal Frame so unique in a time when horror was increasingly leaning toward action.
Number 9. Resident Evil 4. Few games can claim to have reinvented both their own franchise and an entire genre. Resident Evil 4 is one of them. Released in 2005, it abandoned the fixed camera survival horror formula of earlier entries and introduced a revolutionary over-the-shoulder perspective. This wasn't just a minor tweak, it became the blueprint for modern third-person shooters. You play as Leon S. Kennedy, sent to rescue the US president's daughter from a remote European village. What starts as a rescue mission quickly spirals into a nightmare of cultists, parasites known as Las Plagas, and some of the most unforgettable bosses in gaming, from the chainsaw-wielding Dr. Salvador to the grotesque Verdugo. At the time, fans worried Capcom had abandoned horror in favor of action. But the game proved you could balance both. Limited ammo, Creepy environments and relentless enemies kept the tension alive, even as set pieces became more explosive. The blend of horror and action not only revitalized Resident Evil, it influenced games like Gears of War, The Last of Us, and Dead Space. Fast forward to 2023, and Capcom delivered a stunning remake that refined the controls, expanded the story, and gave longtime fans a perfect modernization. Critics hailed it as one of the best remakes ever made, proving that Resident Evil 4's impact is just as strong today as it was 20 years ago. Whether you prefer the original's raw innovation or the remake's polished execution, Resident Evil 4 is a landmark in gaming history and one of the greatest horror games of all time.
Number 8. Resident Evil 2 Remake. When Capcom announced a remake of Resident Evil 2, fans were excited but cautious. The original 1998 classic was a cornerstone of survival horror. How do you update something so beloved without losing its soul? In 2019, Capcom delivered a masterclass in remakes, showing how to modernize a classic while keeping its identity intact. The story follows rookie cop Leon Kennedy and college student Claire Redfield as they try to survive a zombie outbreak in Raccoon City. The remake retains the original's dual-character campaign structure, but completely reimagines the city in stunning detail using the RE engine. Darkened hallways, rain-soaked streets, and flickering lights create a sense of dread that feels fresh yet nostalgic. Gameplay is rebuilt from the ground up. Gone are the fixed cameras and tank controls, replaced by modern, over-the-shoulder aiming. But the survival horror DNA remains. Limited ammo, resource management, and puzzle solving are at the core. The zombies themselves are some of the most terrifying ever rendered. Slow, relentless, and capable of taking a dozen bullets before going down. Add in Mr. X, the trench-coated tyrant that stalks you through the station, and you have one of the most stressful horror experiences of the decade. Critics and fans hailed it as a perfect retelling of the original. It sold millions, revitalized interest in the series, and set a new standard for how remakes should be done. For many players, Resident Evil 2 Remake isn't just a great horror game, it's the blueprint for modern survival horror.
Number 7. Dead Space. Back in 2008, EA's Dead Space proved that sci-fi and horror could blend into something unforgettable. Set aboard the derelict mining ship USG Ishimura, you play as engineer Isaac Clarke, tasked with investigating a distress signal. What he finds is a nightmare. Grotesque necromorphs created from human corpses, and a mystery tied to a strange alien artifact known as the Marker. The game's most famous mechanic is strategic dismemberment. Instead of shooting enemies in the head, players are forced to slice off limbs to disable the monsters. It was a brutal, fresh twist that kept combat tense and resource-driven. Combine that with zero-gravity sequences, suffocating sound design, and a haunting HUD-free interface where health and ammo are built into Isaac's suit, and you had a game that redefined immersion. The 2023 remake took everything fans loved and polished it to perfection. Enhanced visuals, improved enemy AI, and fully voiced dialogue for Isaac made the experience even more cinematic. Critics called it the definitive version of a horror classic, and it reminded everyone why the original was so groundbreaking. Dead Space wasn't just another survival horror, it was proof that horror could compete with big-budget action titles while staying true to its roots. It remains one of the most terrifying space horror games ever made. Number 6. Amnesia: The Dark Descent. In 2010, a tiny Swedish studio called Frictional Games released a horror game that changed everything. Amnesia: The Dark Descent stripped away combat entirely, leaving players truly defenseless for the first time in mainstream horror. No guns, no knives, no fighting back. Your only options were to hide, run, or pray you weren't seen. The game introduced the now famous sanity system. Stay in the dark too long or witness too many horrors, and your character begins to lose his mind. The screen blurs, sounds distort, and hallucinations creep in.
As developer Thomas Grip explained, the team wanted to trick players into scaring themselves. It worked. Players found themselves panicking even when no monster was present, imagining threats that weren't really there. The story follows Daniel, who awakens in a castle with no memory, tasked with uncovering the truth behind its horrific secrets. But the narrative is almost secondary to the atmosphere. The oppressive darkness, the unsettling ambient noises, and the knowledge that if something finds you, you can't fight back. Amnesia also changed gaming culture. Its popularity skyrocketed thanks to YouTubers. PewDiePie's playthroughs of the game helped establish the modern Let's Play horror format. It inspired an entire generation of indie horror developers and directly influenced later hits like Outlast and Soma. Today, Amnesia: The Dark Descent is remembered not just as a horror game, but as a turning point for the genre. It proved that vulnerability and imagination can be far scarier than any arsenal of weapons.
All right, now we're entering the true nightmares, the top 5 horror games of all time. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed with the notification bell on. We've got more countdowns coming, from hidden indie gems to the most terrifying VR horror experiences you probably haven't tried yet. You don't want to miss those.
Number 5. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. By 2016, Resident Evil had drifted so far into action that many fans wondered if it could still be called survival horror. Resident Evil 6 had globe-trotting explosions, car chases, and non-stop gunfights. Fun for some, but a betrayal for longtime horror fans. Then Capcom went back to the drawing board, and in 2017, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard changed everything. For the first time in the mainline series, Capcom switched to a first-person perspective. This wasn't just a gimmick, it immediately made the game feel more intimate, more claustrophobic, and more terrifying. You're not watching Ethan Winters from behind, you're seeing the nightmare unfold through his eyes. That perspective alone made every jump scare and every encounter far more personal. The story begins simply. Ethan receives a message from his missing wife, Mia, that leads him to a dilapidated plantation house in Louisiana. But instead of finding answers, he finds the Baker family, a group of twisted, cannibalistic killers. Jack Baker, in particular, became one of gaming's most iconic stalker enemies, smashing through walls, chasing players through the house, and taunting them with a kind of grotesque charisma. Gameplay returned to classic Resident Evil principles: resource management, exploration, puzzles, and sheer survival. Yet the first-person view made everything feel fresh again. And for those who dared, the PlayStation VR version elevated it into a whole new level of horror. Critics and players alike called it the scariest VR game ever made, and many couldn't even finish it in headset mode. Resident Evil 7 was a course correction that worked. It revitalized the series, won over both critics and fans, and paved the way for Resident Evil Village. More importantly, it proved that Capcom could reinvent itself while still respecting what made the franchise legendary: the feeling of being trapped, vulnerable, and hunted.
Number 4. Silent Hill. When Silent Hill released on the PlayStation in 1999, most horror fans assumed it would be a Resident Evil clone. Instead, Konami delivered something darker, more cerebral, and ultimately more unsettling. Where Resident Evil was about B-movie thrills, Silent Hill was about psychological dread. You play as Harry Mason, a father searching for his missing daughter in the foggy, deserted town of Silent Hill. The game leaned into the limitations of the PlayStation hardware by using dense fog to cover draw distance issues. But what could have been a weakness turned into its greatest strength. That fog became iconic, transforming every street into an oppressive, unknowable void. Gameplay blended exploration, puzzles, and combat, but it was the tone that set it apart. Radios crackled with static whenever enemies were near, shadows danced in the mist, and the sound design, led by Akira Yamaoka, used industrial noise and minimalistic melodies to get under players' skin in ways no traditional score could.
Unlike other horror games of its time, Silent Hill suggested more than it showed. Its story dealt with cults, trauma, and warped realities. The monsters weren't just obstacles, they symbolized deeper psychological fears. Players weren't just scared of dying, they were scared of what the game meant. Silent Hill launched a franchise that rivaled Resident Evil in cultural impact, and while later sequels would refine and deepen the formula, the original still stands as a landmark moment, the point where horror games proved they could disturb your mind as much as your heart rate.
Number 3. Silent Hill 2. If Silent Hill laid the groundwork for psychological horror, Silent Hill 2 perfected it. Released in 2001, it wasn't a direct sequel, but a standalone story following James Sunderland, a man drawn to Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife who died years earlier. From the beginning, Silent Hill 2 makes it clear this isn't a typical horror game. It's not just about monsters, it's about grief, guilt, and the human mind. Every enemy you encounter is a metaphor for James's inner torment. Nurses reflect his repressed sexuality, mannequins mirror his objectification, and the infamous Pyramid Head isn't just a villain. He's James's executioner, a manifestation of his self-punishment. The atmosphere is suffocating. Mist-filled streets, decaying interiors, and a soundtrack that shifts between haunting melodies and distorted noise create a world that feels alive with malice. Unlike most games of its era, Silent Hill 2 didn't explain everything. Its ambiguity forced players to interpret, to question, and to confront themes rarely touched in gaming at the time. The 2024 remake by Bloober Team brought modern visuals and updated mechanics while keeping the narrative's raw power intact. Critics called it one of the most faithful remakes ever, showing just how timeless the original story remains. To this day, Silent Hill 2 is considered the high watermark of psychological horror. It's not just scary, it's devastating. It lingers in your mind, not because of what it shows you, but because of what it makes you realize about yourself.
Number 2. Resident Evil. Few games can claim to have created an entire genre. Resident Evil did. Released in 1996, it wasn't the first horror game, but it defined the rules of survival horror so clearly that nearly every game after followed its lead. Set in the sprawling Spencer Mansion, you play as STAR's operatives Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield, sent to investigate bizarre murders on the outskirts of Raccoon City. What they discover is Umbrella Corporation's grotesque bioweapons, zombies, mutated animals, and monstrous experiments. The game introduced mechanics that would become survival horror staples: limited ammo and health, inventory management that forced tough decisions, locked door puzzles, and save points tied to ink ribbons. Even the fixed camera angles and tank controls, often mocked today, added to the tension. You never knew what was around the next corner until the camera shifted. And then there's the infamous atmosphere. The opening full-motion video, cheesy voice acting. You were almost a Jill sandwich, and stiff animations somehow made the horror feel even more uncanny. It was campy, yes, but also terrifying. For many, that first encounter with a zombie turning its head in the hallway remains one of the most iconic moments in gaming. Resident Evil wasn't just a hit, it was a revolution. It spawned sequels, remakes, films, and a multimedia empire. More importantly, it created the survival horror genre as we know it. Without Resident Evil, there is no Dead Space, no Amnesia, no Outlast. It all started here.
Number 1. PT. It's almost ironic that the greatest horror game of all time isn't even a full game. PT, short for Playable Teaser, was released quietly on the PlayStation Store in 2014 with no explanation. Players who finished it discovered it was actually a secret announcement for Silent Hills, a collaboration between Hideo Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, and Norman Reedus. But even though Silent Hills was canceled, PT became a legend. The premise is deceptively simple. You're trapped in a single hallway. You walk through it again and again, but each loop shifts in subtle and terrifying ways. A door might creak open, a radio might play a disturbing news report, shadows move when you're not looking, and then there's Lisa, the ghost who stalks you relentlessly, sometimes appearing in the mirror, sometimes right behind you, sometimes snapping your neck when you least expect it. What made PT groundbreaking was its minimalism. No weapons, no HUD, no tutorials. Just you, the corridor, and an escalating sense of dread. It forced players to pay attention, to notice the tiniest details, to solve cryptic puzzles under crushing psychological pressure. When the teaser was completed, the reveal of Silent Hills blew gamers' minds, but the project was canceled and PT was pulled from the PlayStation Store. That only amplified its myth. PlayStation 4 consoles with PT installed now sell for thousands, and countless developers have tried and mostly failed to replicate its formula. Despite being only a demo, PT has had more cultural impact than most full-length horror games. It showed that horror didn't need elaborate worlds or huge budgets. Sometimes, one hallway is all it takes to terrify millions, and that's why it stands at number 1.
And that's our countdown of the 20 best horror games of all time. From fog-drenched towns to haunted space stations, these games proved horror can evolve, terrify, and even move us in ways no other genre can. Now it's your turn. Which of these nightmares have you survived? And what game do you think deserved a spot on this list? Share your picks in the comments, because horror is always scarier when it's shared. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe for more horror and gaming deep dives, and share this with a friend who thinks they can handle a good scare. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones in your head. Until next time.